Welcome to Trading Nation. I'm Mike Santoli. The major indexes may be rebounding back into the green for the year right now, but one veteran economic forecaster says stocks are not quite out of the woods just yet. Lakshman Achuthan sees a serious issue on the inflation front that the Fed could be ignoring. Lakshman, good to have you here. So we obviously got some official government inflation numbers this week. CPI pretty much on target, above 2% on the headline. Seems like it's in the zone the Fed's looking for. What does this chart that you have show? What's the message of it at this point?
Well, I think the big point I'd like to make is that inflation is cyclical, and I don't think everybody really understands that. In particular, the Fed and a lot of market participants, they're looking at kind of the level of inflation, and it's generally up there around near target. But what's really important is the direction. Is it accelerating or is it decelerating? And I think a lot rides on which direction it's going. Right now it's headed down.
Oh, it's headed down. So I guess that's your point, right? So that inflation for this cycle or for this part of the cycle has peaked in your estimation. You think that goes against what most economists and the Fed itself is thinking at this point?
Absolutely. I think there was a little blinking last week, but we brought a chart which really demonstrates kind of the upswings and the downswings. This is just a couple of years of inflation cycles here. On the left-hand side, you have the upswing. This is in 2016. That's a reflation call when inflation expectations were near record lows. In 2017, we had made an inflation downturn call. That's the second arrow from the left. And if you recall, that's when Yellen deemed it the biggest mystery of the year. Later in 2017, we had a nice, strong inflation cycle upturn. You have PPI at the year over year at the top and CPI on the bottom of those two lines. And then this summer, this is what's important, we made an inflation cycle downturn call, and that is well underway. We have PPI growth now sitting and CPI growth both sitting at around 10 and 11-month lows. It's not simply about oil. The peak in these things happened back in July. And if we remember what Powell was saying back at Jackson Hole, he was reminiscing about, if inflation is heading down, we can pause and we can wait and we can do all of these things. And finally, last week, we got a little inkling of that. But he has a lot of room to cover to go from several rate hikes to maybe not that many at all.
Yeah. Now, when saying inflation is cyclical, do you mean that all else being equal, it is just going to kind of ebb and flow and now it's on a downturn? Can the Fed alter that path at this point? In other words, if the Fed does hike in December, as most now still think is going to happen, is that going to accelerate the decline in inflation, or how should the Fed actually behave at this moment?
Yeah, well, okay, so Fed policy, if something is cyclical, so growth, which is a separate cycle, and inflation, which we're talking about today, if those are cyclical, Fed policy should be preemptive. And we know that monetary policy works with long and variable lags. So if a cycle like inflation, which is one of their mandates, is already in a cyclical downturn, tapping on the brakes is questionable, let's say.
Right. And if that's the world we're in, and let's say they do take an extended pause, is it possible that inflation can kind of settle around this 2% level, or you think it's going to
no. It's already baked. Great question. It's still going to head down because forward-looking indicators, which anticipated this, are still declining. So if those forward-looking inflation indicators begin to bottom, which they haven't, and you could take a look, for example, at some commodity price inflation, sensitive commodity price inflation, still cycling down. But that's just one driver. But if those indicators begin to bottom, that's one positive. They still have cycles in growth, which are also cycling down to contend with. So I would certainly caution against a lot of tapping on the brakes here.
Yeah, okay. Stay off the break for now. Lakshman, thanks very much for joining us, running us through that. Appreciate it. And thank you for watching Trading Nation. Mike Santoli. We'll see you next time.